Right, so we're coming up with ideas to think, how can we help first-time buyers who are in the early stage of looking to buy, for example, to make sure that you ace buying your first home, you feel confident that you're going to smash that purchase. So when I thought about that and we were chatting about it, we were thinking, well, actually, it's just like applying for a job at the end of the day, and the skills that you need. And the good news is, I've done a lot of this. So what we want to try and do today is pass on those skills. Because the other bit of good news is it's not rocket science. Because I was really rubbish at science at school, but I'm quite good when it comes to buying and selling properties and understanding markets. So what we're going to talk through is the 4 things, the skills that you need to become an ace first-time buyer. And what we're then going to do is, because I can only whip through this in a short period of time today, because I get pulled off stage after 30 minutes so I can answer your questions, in the newsletters that we're doing, we're going to go into much, much more detail. So that over the next few months, you'll really come out of this thinking, wow, I know what I'm doing and I feel really confident, because that's what I know by having talked to people that you want to do. So, who'd like to be a property analyst? This is my favourite bit. This is really, for me, this is dead exciting. So, this is what you are hearing in the marketplace, yes? Prices are soaring. House prices faster than any full year for 17 years. Load of crap. Quite frankly, there are lots of things going on, and if you understand the way the indices work, they are actually, most of them, apart from Zoopla, are exaggerating what's happening to house prices, particularly in London and particularly in flats. So at the moment they're telling you double-digit house price increases. Do you know what the average for how much more the average first-time buyer paid for a property this year than last year? Any guesses? This is a joint thing. I don't want to be lonely here at the front. So have a guess. Not 10%, it was 0, not far off. On average, first-time buyers paid 3% more for a property than they did the previous year. And that's partly because you bought flats rather than houses, because a lot of the inflation that we've seen is purely on houses, it's not on flats, okay? And what you can offer is restricted because you need a mortgage. What somebody like myself can offer, because there's about over 50% of people who own their property outright, I can offer anything I want as long as I've got the cash to support it. So house prices have gone up a lot, but actually flat prices haven't, and therefore the amount that first-time buyers are paying typically hasn't. I say typically. Now, lots of numbers, this is my favourite thing. So, you will be hearing, house prices have accelerated, they're going bananas, first-time buyers have no chance of getting on the ladder. And then I come here and I think there's an awful lot of hard-working people in this audience that think that's a load of rubbish, because you've worked hard and you know you can get on the ladder. And we got 400,000 people buying their first home last year. And that's no different than the average that's been for donkey's years, however much you paid before. Now, the reason I'm showing you this data is because this is the data that the news use to meet their headlines. But the only data that they use is the stuff in green and is the stuff in blue. And that tells you absolutely nothing. It tells you the average price in all the properties bought in London are £521,000. But you can buy properties in London for £250,000. You can buy shared ownership for under £100,000. So this data is no use to you because it has no relevance whatsoever to the property you're buying. The other bit of data they've got in there, and you'll be surprised at this, that actually in London house prices went up much, much lower than everywhere else. And part of the reason for that is yourselves. There is a restriction, there's like a bit of a cap on house price growth now that never existed before, because lenders can't lend at the rate that they used to. So they can't do 100% mortgages or 125% mortgages, as some idiot came up with that helped crash the market by 20% last year. So what I want to show you is basically, if you go back to the credit crunch, you'll have bought property in London, the average price was £300,000. It has gone up on average a lot, 75% is quite a lot, and year on year it's gone up by about 5.5%. But look what's happening in the northeast. The average house price last year for the northeast was exactly the same as it was 14 years ago. Funnily enough, they haven't got big growth in first-time buyers. So all the data that the media are giving you is just of no use to you whatsoever. What's important is, if you buy now and house prices crash, they might crash by about 20%, but as long as you can still pay your mortgage, it doesn't matter. And if you hadn't bought, well, you'd still have to rent, wouldn't you? Or live with mum and dad, which has its own consequences, trust me, I've seen it, which isn't always pretty. So all of this data here, it's useful and it's interesting for headlines, but it's of no use to you, because all you need to care about is the property that you want to buy on the street that that property is available, or in the location that you do it. So that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about now. Where do you start? This is a fantastic little site. So whatever the media is telling you, if you go onto Propcast, put in the postcode, so it's down to postcode level, not regional, not the whole of London. You'll tell you, so you saw I put house prices going up by 5.5% in London. In those blue bits, they're not going up by 5.5% at all. In fact, some prices are dropping. So it's really important when you're buying, in the area that you want to buy, is it a hot market? Is it going really fast, where you have to be really organised? Or is it a slow market, and you might be able to get a little bit of a better deal than you thought you would? But you've got to know whether you're in a busy market or not. So that's the first thing to do. The second thing you do, I use Rightmove, but you've got Zoopla and other ones, is that you want to see how fast the types of properties are that you want to buy, how fast are they selling. So for every 10 properties that are listed for sale, if there's 4 or more that are already sold, and I'll show you how to do that, then it's quite a fast moving market, which means you've got to have all your ducks in a row, you've got to have your legal company ready, your offer ready from a mortgage through a mortgage broker. If it's 3 or less, then you can probably make a little bit of an offer and take a little bit of time. Okay, so you use the Propcast, that gives you a bit of an idea, hot market or not. But even in a cold market, you might find that the property you're interested in, a 2-bed flat for example, is actually selling quite fast. So just because it says it's a cold market, it doesn't mean that all properties are selling really, really fast. It's all about the property on the street, and that's why you actually become a better expert than me or anybody else, because you focus on the property and the road that you want to buy on. So on this, I'll just nip back, on the third one down, on the middle one down here, what I then do is, once I look for a property that's advertised for sale, I look at what that price is, and then what I want to know is, well, I wonder what's happened to property prices for that flat over the years. And on this one, this is really interesting. So you remember the newspapers are telling you house prices have gone up by 5.5%, and that the average house price in London is £521,000. Well, here's interesting. Somebody bought this property in 2016 for £393,000, and then somebody else has bought it for less 5 years later. So that's why you ignore everything the media are telling you, because it's just about the property that you want to buy on the street that you want to buy on. So you check what it's advertising for, how busy the market is, and then you have a look at the sold property price data. What you have to bear in mind is, once this data gets on the sites, it's anything from 3 to 6 months old. And a market in property can turn from a good to a bad market and vice versa within about 3 months. So if you see that property is advertised for, as it is, for 425,000, you can see that the market's improved a little bit. See what I mean? So, and then that gives you more information to start talking to agents to get a little bit of an idea of what's happening. So how do you find that data? So basically there's a little trick with Rightmove, and a lot of people, again, they'll be there on the other portals and stuff. You're very welcome to this presentation, by the way, if you would like it, it will go out on film. So the first thing you do, when you put in your search, so I put in within a mile, it might be half a mile, you might get too many searches. My maximum price range is £450, and then the secret box that nobody knows about, how special it is. Include under offer and sold subject to contract. That is the secret box that will tell you all of the properties that are sold. And where that's really useful is if you see properties like the one that you want, that are actually selling at the 425 when they previously sold at the 385, you know that that 425 price is about right. Whereas some agents will overprice properties, and that might be going on a little bit at the moment, and they might be putting them up at 480, 490, but they're not sold. You want to concentrate, to understand what a property is worth, you want to concentrate on the ones that are actually selling now, and look at the price that you've seen historically. Does that make sense? So it's all about you getting to grips. When you make an offer, you don't want to over-offer, do you? You want to make sure that you're doing a fair offer, and this is how you do it. You really get to understand, and all the data's free. It does take a little bit of work, and as I say, we'll talk about that a little bit more. To look at the sold price data on the right, you go over to house prices, and it says sold house price data. It's fabulous information. So would you like to know now how much that property might fall by if there's another crash? Because that would be quite useful, wouldn't it? If you're making an offer on it, and you might want to know, well, worst case, what's it going to be worth if this is a recession? You can find out because the recession happened between 2007 and 2010, and you can have a look to see what prices properties fell to in those dates. So there are some properties, roads and properties only fell by about 5%, and there's others that will have fallen by 30%. So you know that before you buy and before you make an offer. So you start becoming the property analyst for the properties that you're doing, and you know how much of a risk it is or not if you're buying in a good or in a bad market or it crashes. The other data that's quite useful, this is government data. So, you know, I showed you that sold property price data. That's the same on any site, because it comes from the government register. When you buy a property, you fill in a little form and you say how much you bought that property for. That gets registered onto the land registry, and it's that data that appears on Rightmove and Zoopla and all the other ones. So it's all the same. And all you have to do is go in and have a little at the house index, fallen in the last 5 years, but this tells you that property prices have gone up by 10 or 15%. I'd worry about buying that property because for whatever reason it's not performing as well as the local market. So this is how you basically analyse it. Is this a good property deal, and understand what offer to make on that property. So this is my lovely spreadsheet, which we will talk and explain much more in our newsletter and on the app. The only way you understand is this a good deal and what to offer is you really have to compare it against other properties. So if, for example, you're thinking, I don't know whether to do help to buy or shared ownership, I would find a property on the open market that you could afford. I would have a look at what are the costs in. So for me to walk in that door, how much do I put down as a deposit? What are my fees? I would then compare that to a help to buy. I would then compare it to shared ownership, and I'd compare it to private renting. Then what I have a little look at as well is what was kind of like the ongoing costs of doing that. So is it going to cost me more to buy into shared ownership than it is private renting? But this helps you understand 2 bed with 2 en suites, the asking price, the square foot, price per square foot, and the leasehold cost. Never ever go and visit a flat unless you know the leasehold length, the service charge, and the ground rent. Never. Don't bother, because that is crucial information. If a leasehold is less than 80 years, the likelihood is you won't get a mortgage on it. So don't go and fall in love with something, make an offer, and then find out you can't, the mortgage lender won't back you. So never view that. And then, as I mentioned before, you've got your sold property price history, and then you can have a little record as to how well this property is done. If it's not a new build, of course, how well this property is done over the years. Is this a good bet? All the data's there, and it's all completely free of charge. Again, that's quite complex on this to explain in a minute or two, but we'll do that in a little bit later. Other things you can do, talk to agents. If you talk to about 10 or 15 agents, 3, 4, 5 of them will tell you the truth. Okay, and they'll tell you if the market's not going very well, or they'll tell you if it's really hot for your particular property that you're looking to buy. And ask them, again, for you to make an offer, the way I do that is I find out what else is around and how much is it sold for. They're not legally allowed to tell you, if somebody's made an offer and it says sold subject to contract, they're not legally allowed to tell you what price was accepted, but they'll tell you whether it was near to the asking, a little bit less, or if it went for a little bit more. And again, that'll think, right, okay, well those 3 properties are very similar to the one that I'm doing. They all sold for 400, but I can see there's a few issues with mine versus that. I'll go for 385. And then you justify that price. So it's all about comparisons and getting the right data. If you are buying, do sign up for all the property alerts, because properties can come up very quickly, so make sure that they arrive in your inbox before everybody else. And do check out some of the new build schemes. You might pay more for them, But certainly on Help to Buy, because of that loan and because you pay a very, very low mortgage rate, because you're only borrowing 75% thanks to the government being the bank of mum and dad for you, you might actually find that the ongoing cost of owning that property is actually less than if you bought another property for less money. So that's the sort of thing that you need to look at. So I hope that's useful. The other thing I was asked to talk about, and we do talk a lot about that, is 32 London boroughs. That's an awful lot of postcodes. I don't know how many it is, but it's thousands. So if the first thing I always say to first-time buyers is if you're starting out, don't look on the portals, go to a mortgage broker and understand how much you can borrow. Even if you're not planning to buy in 3 years' time. Good mortgage broker will love to sit down with you, explain all the things you need to be doing. So even if you're years out, don't worry, go and have a chat with them, get an idea of how much you can offer. Once you've got that, it's about them mapping out and saying, right, this is my place of work, this is where my friends and family are, this is where my hobbies are. Okay? And then working out in between that triangle, where are the places that you could live. What I used to do is I used to live on the Piccadilly line, and I'd jump on the Piccadilly line from where I'd work, and then I'd keep going out to the next stop, and you can do it on Rightmove now, we didn't have that in my day. So I'd keep going out to the next stop until I found somewhere I liked, and I could afford. And that's how I used to do it. You can do the same with the train. So that's really good, one of the ways to do it. You might now be able to negotiate, and this is the big game changer potentially for first-time buyers, is you might only have to be in the office for a couple of days. I used to come down to London twice a week. I come down twice a month now, which is great because I've got 2 dogs and you prefer the fields, if I'm honest. So you've got to think about, of all of these things. And some people say to me, well, I had a lady, she wanted to live in Windsor. Why do you want to live in Windsor? She said, oh, well, I love the restaurants. And I said, well, are you out at a restaurant every night? No. Well, how often do you go to a restaurant? How often do you go out? Well, twice a week. I said, fine, live in Slough. A nice street in Slough, because they do have nice streets, despite what you're told. Save 100 grand a year on the price of the property and the mortgage, and take a taxi. Or find a really good friend in Windsor that doesn't mind putting you up overnight. That's a good tip. So it is really about, don't think that just because you want to be in that area. I used to live in Acton, actually right on the North Circular, but I spent my time in Chiswick and Ely, because in those days Acton was so really have a think about that and take your time, spend the weekend there. That's a really good tip. Just spend the weekend, go home on a Friday night, spend the weekend in the area, go back to work on Monday morning from that area. It's a really great way of doing it, and take your time. There's nothing worse than being in a location you don't want to be. This is something that I don't think most of you would be doing, and it's completely understandable, but it's hugely important, whether you're buying a flat or a house. When you buy a property, you're buying 2 things. You're buying the land underneath that property, and you're buying a physical construction, okay? And they are built in the most weird and wonderful ways. There are polystyrene built houses. There are timber framed houses. There are concrete houses. These types of structures all have implications as to whether you can get a mortgage or not, and their value as well. So if you're buying a flat, typically I think it's, I can't remember how much it is, if anybody really knows, if you're above a certain floor, the chances of you getting a mortgage is really slim. When I bought my property in Acton, it was half a house. So there was a 1930 semi, I bought the bottom flat. Some lenders won't lend on flats that have been converted. So again, you've got to understand that property and you've got to understand the impact. So you can see the construction side of things, but what is underneath your property is as important. Put your hand up if you'd like to be flooded. No? Put your hand up if you'd like radon gas coming through into your living room. Possibly not. So really understand what is underneath that. In London, you're kind of mostly okay, although what you'll have in Nottingham, we've got lots of coal mines, so we have lots of things falling in. And that's a popular thing you do a search for. In London, you'll have an underground going through. And you might hear that noise, some places that you go, so you need to be aware of things like that. So really important, you've got to understand what's underneath the property as much as how it's constructed, because that really can affect whether you buy that property. The big thing, of course, that you'll know about is cladding, and what a dreadful impact that has, because boy, have we messed up how we're dealing with that. Hopefully it'll get sorted. And the other thing is the maintenance side. So if you're buying a flat, I would prefer that anybody that bought a flat, it's not always possible, does something, buys one with what we call a sinking fund. So that sink is in, you have in your bathroom, sinking fund. And that means, who should I choose? We have to choose you. So I've got a lovely flat. There's no sinking fund. I've lived in it for 5 years. I've just sold it to you. The bad news is, because nobody told you because there wasn't a big survey, they need a new roof. And you're copping the cost of the roof for the next 25 years, along with all the other flat holders. And that could be a lot of money. So if there's a sinking fund, I will have paid in my 5 years ownership towards the cost of a new roof, and then you'll pay your share, so it'll be a lot less. Yeah. So really important to always ask about that if you can. You want to buy, if you're buying a flat, you want the leasehold, the guys that are managing it, to really understand, particularly second homes in London, they are not, they've been around for a long time and they're not in great condition. So it's probably one of the few places where I say do look at new build, because I'm quite concerned about the lease length and also the quality of a lot of the flats here. So have a little look at that, but you need to understand that. And the other thing to do, particularly if you're buying new build, is never just look at the price. Always check the square foot. There are some very clever designers out there, and what they do is, say for example, you've got that one on the right, and you think 440, oh, I won't go and visit the other property because it's 25 grand more. This must be better value. And yes, it looks nice and pretty on the outside, but what I see is expensive maintenance costs, because it's an old property, and I own an old property, and it is expensive to maintain. So I look at that, but if you take that property and you divide it by its actual square foot, you can see that actually it's more expensive than the other one. You might notice that when you walk in, but just beware that that's how they've designed it, and they may even have bought smaller furniture to make it look bigger. Okay? So really important when you're looking at properties, compare the square footage, because the more expensive property may actually be better value for money. So that kind of that's the sort of stuff you've got to think about as a property analyst to try and understand whether it's the right thing for you. The next thing is to be a financial expert. Sounds a little scary, doesn't it? The good news is that's not actually that difficult. All you need to do is, and you've all have heard about this, so I'll whip through this, you look at your credit score. That is so important. The better credit score you have, the more offers you're likely to get, the better deals you're likely to get, basically. So check out your credit score. If you don't know how to do that, the biggest question I get asked today is, I'm the first time, but I don't know where to start. Just go to a mortgage broker. Yes, talk to your lender because they've got all of your data, but don't go on to Rightmove, don't go on to Zoopla. Just go to a mortgage broker and understand how much money you've got to spend first. And then you can start looking for properties, understand if you need a government scheme help or if you can buy on the open market. So get your credit risk done, and as I say, your broker can help you with that. We had a situation, did everybody watch Location? Yeah? Kirsty. Can't stand her. She's my nemesis. So they managed to get a first-time buyer, have an offer, and the people who were buying didn't realise they couldn't borrow the money for the deposit. It's not a surprise they asked me to write the guide to buying a home, which they wanted me to do for free, so I said no. Oh, I forgot this is being recorded. Oops. So anyway, the whole point of this is you've got to really understand all of the costs and when you have to pay them. So a lot of them you don't have to pay until the day that actually everything gets completed. But others you will have to, like your survey fee or anything like that, you'll have to pay up front. And do you need a standard mortgage? There was a terribly sad story, and I was really shocked. Again, people just don't check these things out. This girl was a really bright girl, went into the pandemic, decided very bravely in April that she was going to go freelance. Wanted to buy a property, hadn't spoken to a mortgage broker. Tell me what happened to her? Self-employed, needed 2 years of accounts, couldn't buy. Yeah? And now the prices have gone up. So bad news for her. So always check. Do you need a standard mortgage for a specialist? In some cases, you might need a specialist broker, specialist lender for the type of property, if it's concrete or other type of property. And a lot of people slag off the government schemes. The newspapers particularly enjoy doing this. The schemes are good for the right person at the right time. Okay? There's nothing wrong with them whatsoever. So they are worth investigating if they're the sort of thing that would help you on the ladder, and that's what they're there for. If you've got a small deposit, that's what, but you can afford the mortgage, that's what Help to Buy is for. If you have to stay in a particular area, that's what, and you can't afford the property, or you need a bigger property and you can only afford a one-bed flat, that's what shared ownership is for. Okay, so for the right circumstances, as long as you understand the downsides as well as the upsides, they are good schemes to go for. And what I try and do say to everybody, I think I might have mentioned this slightly wrongly earlier. So say, for example, you're buying a £300,000 home property. You want to work out what are the costs in to get me through that front door. Your deposit, for example, your savings, your legal fees, your survey fees, etc. How much is it going to cost me to get into that particular property? How much is it to purchase? And what are the ongoing costs? And certainly in the case of things like shared ownership and Help to Buy, the government scheme, what's it going to cost me to sell? Because you'll have to pay valuation fees you wouldn't have to pay if you had an ordinary home not on a scheme. So really important to lay out those different costs, because just like with the square foot analysis, you might find that a Help to Buy deal, even though it's more expensive, is a much better deal, for example, than buying a second home property, even though it's cheaper. So you only really learn about property and the right thing to do for you by comparing different properties, whether it's different areas, different deals, whatever it might be. But break your costs into that, and again, we'll go into much more detail on how to do this ongoing. How you get help, and this is the beauty of this, versus being a property analyst, there's a ton of help out there. You can access your credit score for free, or talk to a broker to help. You must, is everybody got like either a Help to Buy ISA or a lifetime ISA? Free money. It's free money from the government. How often does that happen? We've had responses on a survey go, no, not accepting that, thank you very much. Don't like government schemes. And I'm like, it's free money. No, don't want to get locked in. It's just free money. What more? They know deposits are really tough, especially in London. Take advantage. Don't be daft, basically. Get the money from them. Do speak to a mortgage broker and they will help you put the budget together so that you know you're not going to fall into the location trap of borrowing a deposit and then finding out you can't do that.
Sorry, wasn't furlough free money?
Sorry?
Furlough was free money, wasn't it?
Furlough?
Yeah.
I'm not a furlough expert. I suppose it was. I didn't get any free money. Fortunately, we were very lucky. The property market, for some bizarre reason, after everybody expected it to flunk by 15%.
Sorry, can I go back to the last slide?
Yes? There we go. Right. Okay, there we go. Oh, I've lost where I am now. So, yes. So
Okay.
furlough for those that got
We've got 15 minutes left.
Okay, cool. We've got loads of time. And the other thing is you've got to understand your costs, particularly with things like Shared to Buy, and particularly if you're buying leasehold. And I don't think we ever, if we're buying leasehold, and I've been caught out in the past, spend enough time working out all of the costs. I never ever view a flat unless I know the lease length, unless I know the service charge, and unless I know the rent. And if the agent or the developer does not cough up that information, run away. Because they are supposed to cough up that information. Developers and housing associations have no excuse. They should be doing that on advertising. Agents, sometimes it's a little bit more difficult because they've got to get that information from the vendor, and that's not always easy. But just really make sure. And the reason is because leasehold is complicated. It's not a bad scheme, works very well for very many people, including myself in the past. But you have to understand how long that lease is. If you're buying Help to Buy today, typically there'll be a 999-year lease with £0 rent. Okay? Whereas somewhere else you might look at an offer on, there's less than 80 years left on the lease, and you may not be able to get a mortgage from it, and as a result of that, the sale will probably collapse within 6 weeks, and you'll have spent a lot of money and just lost your dream home. So just don't view unless you get that information from. Talked about the service charge before. The service charge from one block of flats to another does not mean the same thing. Some are maintenance, some are maintenance plus your sinking fund. Okay, so you've got to understand what your costs are. Some properties you're responsible for the windows, some you're not. So you really have to understand in a lot of detail that leasehold contract. I wouldn't make an offer on any property unless I had read that leasehold contract or given it to a legal company to check it out for me. Because it might, for example, if you are self-employed or like me, got dogs, they might not be allowed. We had a guy once, he went to auction, bought a flat, went to rent it out in the lease, not rentable. Duh, put it back on the market, lost a lot of money. Not the most sensible thing. So there are often restrictions, so make sure you understand that. You've heard of ground rent and ground rents that are doubling, etc. Make sure you want to avoid those. And the most important, who's managing it? If I'm looking to buy a property in a block of flats that's existing, I'm knocking on all the doors. I think I'm a little weird, but I'd rather check it out. I'm very polite. You can usually check when you, or catch people as they're going in, might be slightly politer. But ask them what the management company is like. If there's a horror story, you'll be there for 15 minutes as they walk you through it, but that 15 minutes was worth the investment to walk away. Okay? So do check those things out.
Sorry. Regarding the ground rent, we just have information that there might be new regulation coming in.
There is already. Yes.
Is it coming in?
Yes. So new regulation is coming in, which is why on Help to Buy, they've already jumped it because they're bringing in the 9-year leases and they're bringing in 0 ground rents. So they've jumped the legislation. When the legislation comes in, if, for example, there's a flat with an 80-year lease, when you go to renew it, then you get the advantage of the legislation, but it's not in yet. Okay? And the legislation at the moment is really slow, really slow. So I just want to check the time before and make sure I'm getting it. Cool. You lot are hopeless at negotiating. Just being honest. There are things out there that says, oh, Help to Buy is at a premium. I don't think Help to Buy is sold at a premium. I think you forgot to negotiate. Right? Negotiate. It doesn't matter if you get turned down, but at least try. I say that because my first job was negotiating, so it's just killing to see. Know the seller's circumstances. Doesn't mean you have to kind of pry, but are they in a hurry to move? Do they need a guaranteed purchaser, which could be you as a first-time buyer, rather than somebody who has to sell in order to purchase that property? Yeah? If it's a divorce, probably run away. My niece bought, I think she bought, and also probate's a difficult one. So I think my niece, it took her a year to purchase the property. They did a very good deal on it and they've just made a lot of money on it. But be aware that they can slow things down because the person in the flat doesn't, or whoever, doesn't necessarily want to move. Okay, so paperwork doesn't get done. So be aware of that. There's something negative in the survey. Interestingly, 2 things with surveys. One of them, the surveyor came back to me and said, for Christ's sake, Kate, make an offer, full price, now. They've undervalued the property as an agent. Oh, okay. And I did, and they had. In another case, we had a guy, one of the properties I bought, there was a problem with a possible subsidence underneath the property. And what had actually happened was the ground hadn't settled well enough. And as a result, the floor had sunk, dead easy to fix. And in actual fact, rather than negotiate money off, what I did negotiate was the poor seller had to have his whole kitchen floor ripped out 10 foot deep and had to have it all put back while his kitchen moved to the garage and a microwave. But that's what he wanted rather than money off. So that's how it worked. So anything negative in the survey, if that wasn't spotted by the agent, then you can always do that. When I sold my mum's place a few years ago, previous place, we knew that the electrics needed doing. We knew it cost £7,000. We said it's offers over, and by the way, you need to spend £7,000 on the electrics, and that's been considered in the asking price. So we didn't get lots of silly offers on that. So just be aware of those things. And get those comparable properties. Property 1, property 2, property 3, very similar on the road to and from. And don't be in a hurry. Who watches Place in the Sun? Who watch that? You know when they go on, they go, oh my God, it's up for £100,000. It's up for 150. They They come back, we're not going to accept £100,000, we'll accept 125. Split the difference. Split the difference. It's not what it's about what is that property actually worth. Because if other properties are worth 125, then yeah, 125 is a good deal. But if everything else is going for 110, I'm not paying 125. It's not about splitting the difference. And what I never get, I mean, there are times when I've done it before, but if I make an offer on a Friday on a property and it gets rejected, for example, I say to the agent, and I put it in writing so that they always come back to it, they have to come back to us. I'm going to leave my offer on the table over the weekend, have a think about things, and I'll have another chat with you Monday. When you make an offer on a property and that seller hears that offer, over that weekend they're going, well, what if we did accept it? What if we did accept it? And then they go and find a property that they like. So you never do this quick negotiation thing. I do. Unless the market's really hot, this is the property you want, you've lost 2 others, you don't care. But otherwise, just take your time. Let that offer sink in for people. Okay? And it's not just the price. So certainly with developers, it might be furniture, it might be appliances, we've spoken about repairs, it might be speed of moving in. So all of those things are things that you should consider. It may not always be possible to negotiate. I don't think you can, for example, on share to buy because it's all regimented, etc. But if you can negotiate, always give it a go. You have an advantage as a first-time buyer. I've let first-time buyers buy property from me for a lot less than I'd let anybody else do. Because I've made the money that I wanted out of that property and I know they're trying to get on the ladder. So actually people are quite kind, if you like, to your circumstances. So do take advantage of that. Now, I have to say, I'm a bit rubbish at this. I've got other people that do this. I'm not the best at project managers. But you have an agent, you have a vendor, you have a legal company, you have a mortgage broker, you have a lender, you have a surveyor. And they're not particularly good at talking to each other, quite frankly. That's one of my jobs outside of here, is to get them to do that. Do not leave it to them to tell you what's going on. Don't ring them every 5 minutes, but do agree up front how they're going to update you and how often you're going to do. Now, I can see that some of you are here as loving couples. I've got a little tip for you. Please don't let one of you ring the agent in the morning, not talk to your other half, and then the other one rings them with the same question in the afternoon. Project manage, decide who's going to do what, decide who's going to liaise, but do not leave it to them. This is your property, you're buying it, you're in charge, you're the project manager, move it forward. Soon as I make an offer and have it accepted, the first thing I ask, and I have a fantastic conveyancer, and she hates me for this and tells me off every time, which is a lot. I say, right, I want a moving date. I know it's not guaranteed, but I want an idea of a moving date. And she's like, you can't do that because I don't know what the legal questions are or how fast. I go, don't care, Rose. Put a date out. This is when I want to move. Let's check with the chain. And then 2 people come back in that chain and go, we're going on holiday. Do not go on holiday. Please don't go on holiday. It's the worst thing you could do. That's not my phone, is it? Just a check. Oh, sorry. Anybody interesting? Mum? So, absolutely drive this yourself. Really, really important. That you drive that purchase. You're in charge. You want to get to that date and share that with everybody. And please don't go on holiday. It's the most frustrating thing for a whole year. There is also a mega amount of paperwork. We are trying to get rid of this in the industry, but it is going to take us up to 5 years because it's hugely complicated. But you will have an A4 file about that thick by the time you've finished. Get an A4 file. Whoever is good at filing, make sure that all that stuff there, because actually you'll need it when you sell it. We have got something called property logbooks coming up, which will actually digitalise all of that for you. So they're starting to come through. But you'll need that paperwork, so do keep track of that. Right, last bit. I'll do all right.
You've got 5 minutes.
Okay, 10 essential to-dos.
Questions?
Start 2 years before you can buy. So do start this process early. Make sure you understand your affordability and your credit score. Know the prices, we've had a good long chat about that. Get your survey done. On new builds, coming up is something called the New Homes Ombudsman. That is going to allow you to get a snagging check done before everything's finalised. A lot of developers won't let you do that now, but that's starting to come, hopefully from April onwards. It's voluntary, but from next year, that will go out to everybody. A little tip, you'll get very excited because you've gone through this trauma, and you think you're about to have a breakdown, and somebody says, we're exchanging Thursday. And you go, oh, we're exchanging Thursday, that's fabulous. It won't happen. Then you'll be exchanging Tuesday. Oh, brilliant, we're exchanging. Won't happen. It can take up to 3 times to exchange, so I'm just warning you of that, so you stay safe. Make sure you have a legal company ready to go before you make an offer. As soon as you make an offer, they will ask you for your legal company. You want a good legal company and pay a decent amount. If you go cheap, they're looking after too many cases and you will fall behind and you could even lose the sale, so don't do that. If you're moving out from a rented property, check your tenancy agreement and make sure that you stick to that and alert your landlord. Are you sure about moving your own stuff? A lot of people move their own stuff. It's not always best. If you're in a 1 or 2 bed property, fine. But if you're in a 3 bed or more, just get somebody in. Places like Anyvan or removal company are much, much better. And make sure you review your mortgage regularly. Yeah, because you could be paying a lot of money if after 2 years fixed, for example, whereas actually you could be saving quite a lot. So, lots to do, plenty of help available. FirstHomeCoach is one of them. And I'm hoping now we have some time for questions, which I'm hoping you'll ask, or I'll be a bit lonely up here. I think we have do we have runners with mics? Oh, there's a lady back there. Hello. I'm quite short, so.
Oh, hi.
Oh, hello. I can hear you now.
I just wanted to ask, just going back to the point that you made, with regards to being a freelancer.
Yep.
So I was just wondering about mortgage brokers. Is there a website or somewhere where we'll be able to find specialist brokers who cater to specific freelancers, or if you're a contractor?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a lot of people, for me, that bother to come and spend the money coming here today, knowing that you might not be buying in 2 or 3 years' time, talk to those guys and ask them if they specialise or have what facilities they have for those people that are self-employed. There isn't, I'm afraid, a website to choose, but if you're going with a mortgage, so there's different mortgage brokers, the small ones, large ones. Some of them will actually specialise in that. So just ask them how many people they are looking after and when was the last time they did a mortgage for somebody who was self-employed. It's a great question. I'm sorry I can't deliver your exact answer because it's a good one, but always ask and say, I'm self-employed, do you do lots of that? Do you do lots of mortgages for self-employed? They will probably be dead, and they will pretty much be honest with you. Brokers are regulated, so they can't tell you porcupines because they get told off otherwise. Okay, next one.
I got the mic here.
Oh, you got the mic. Gosh, look at that one. Nice.
So many of the agents or like platforms now, they market themselves as having the off-market listings.
Yeah.
And I want to hear about your comments, your insights, and any tips on that, or it's just like a marketing tactic?
My cynical view would be it's probably a marketing tag. Because why on earth would anybody in their right mind as a seller sell something off-market? Rather than telling everybody about it, because when you sell a property, you need about 10 people to view that property before you get an offer. It might be the first person, it might be the 10th person. But I would ask them, well, why are you doing off-market properties? How does the seller know they're getting the best deal? The only time when you would get a better deal, for example, I'm trying to think of what circumstance. So when we put a property up for sale, I think we put it up for offers over 750, and somebody came in and offered us 780 to take it off the market, and we weren't sure about doing that. We did do it because they would wait for us to move and find a property because they were in rented accommodation. So the only time you were off market is quite good is if, for example, you're one of the there's a terrible word to use for that, but property finders, if you like, and therefore they're seeking the buyer that can afford the million, million and a half, etc. and they kind of check them out. They know them or they know that person and they do the deal. So it's only really worth doing where there's quite a shortage of properties. But for me, I would never recommend a seller does that, to be honest, unless that person that's offering the off market would do it. So I would feel quite odd with my seller's hat on, because I can't see how it's in their advantage to miss people out. One more.
When it comes to sort of the lease length, it might be a stupid question, but...
Look, there's no stupid question. As first-time buyers, ask every question. Every time I come to a show like this, you lot teach me about questions I should be answering that I never have. Okay? So it's as much for me to learn. There's no stupid questions. There we go. That's one answer.
In a block of flats, for example,
Yeah.
would it be something that you could assume, well, initially yes, but after a while, that the lease lengths for all the flats in a particular building are the same, or could you widely vary?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So when they were put up for sale, they would have all had the same lease length. That could either be 999, as for a lot of the new builds today, because the new legislation is coming in. A lot in London was sold at 125 years. So you can see why, actually, a lot of them are 80, 90 now, because a lot of them were built 50 odd years ago. So the only time you would find that they were different leases, and it is possible, is say, for example, I'm in one of the block of flats that was sold at 125-year lease. Now most of the lease length is 90 years. A good thing to have a look at is if somebody else has gone up to 999 or 250 or back to 125, they must have bought an extension to that lease. Again, they're making that easier to do, but we're required legislation, so we're a few years away from it. So you might get different lease lengths because some have extended and some haven't. So definitely worth looking at and always asking. Good question.